I'd rather refocus and shape where we're going as opposed to just saying, I'm cutting off this limb.
Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories. So here's my story. A couple months into the pandemic, we bought this. It was actually a gift that my husband got for me. This thing called a farm stand. And it's an indoor hydroponic growing thing for like vegetables and mostly like lettuces and herbs and some vegetables. And
is that the plural of lettuce? Is lettuces?
Lettuce-i?
Fish. Is it
lettuce? I don't know.
Is that the point of your story, or did I get you off track? I feel that that's not the point of your story.
It is not, but who's to say that that's not the more important thread to follow here?
I just shut up now.
Well, you know what? This is a little bit of a sentimental moment for me because the very first time you and I recorded any kind of podcast thing was your old podcast, and you had me on as a guest, and we had a discussion about the plural of albatross, whether it was albatrosses or albatrossi or...
It was not albatrossi. I'm pretty sure.
I'm not sure we ever solved that, but anyway, back to the story. So what's important to know about this story is I historically have a black thumb. Like I can keep philodendrons alive in the house. That's the one plant, but mainly because they exhibit like extraordinary signs of not doing well. And as long as you like get them some water, get them in, move their spot or whatever, they will come back. So you can really abuse them. Although I don't try to abuse them. It's just, I can see that a plant is suffering, but I don't know whether it needs like more water, more light, less light. Like I don't know how to diagnose what it needs. And so...
But your children survived.
We run a survival of the fittest household for certain. So everyone says like, oh, you can't kill a succulent. I'm like, oh yeah.
That sounds like
hold my beer. Trust me, I can kill a succulent like that. So back to the story. So we bought this thing. And it's like a Jetsons looking wild. I'll see if I can I have tons of pictures to show you. But here's what's been really interesting. There's at least 2, maybe 3 points that I kind of want to touch on. So one leads back to what I was just saying. There was so much value for me in narrowing down the variables because a couple things. There's a Facebook group, so you can post things and say, well, what is this and what is that? And so there's like instant feedback. But more importantly... Oh,
you mean from the manufacturer?
There's a Facebook group of people who own a farm stand who can kind of fill you in on things.
Okay.
And I learned some really basic things like if they're long and, if they're sort of like leggy and lower color, that means they're not getting enough light, or this means they're getting too much light, or that's too much pH or lower pH. But what's interesting, because it's hydroponic, it eliminates all the variables of soil. Mm-hmm. It doesn't eliminate the variable of sun, but you have very distinct control over what equates to the sun because there's indoor grow lights. So they are right there. You know for a fact that your plants are getting X amount of sun a day because there's a timer and they're right there. So I don't have to worry about, well, I think that gets sun all day, or does it get blocked by that big oak tree or whatever, which was another variable. Like our outside we have a lot of big trees. And so sun is a really hard thing to, address in my yard. So, and how much water something's getting. My yard in the back has a really high water table because we're on the edge of the floodplain. So yes, I may not overwater something on the top, but if it's been a wet summer, the water table's right down there. And so my plants could rot, but I don't have to worry about that because the water is controlled. So it's been really interesting, like just the exercise of when something is hard or complicated, kind of narrowing down the variables so that there's less guessing and you can control things has been useful. So that's one kind of part that I thought has been great. But here's what really wanted me to use it as a story is I have had a very confronting experience with something that is super important to growing things, which is the action of pruning.
Okay.
I am a very reluctant pruner. It's really hard for me to give up on anything that has possibility to it. And so I'm getting almost weirdly emotional talking about my tomato plants here. I quickly got okay with the thing where you're supposed to pinch off the suckers, that wherever there's like a Y split, the little grow. I got okay with that sort of. But a number of these plants, you really have to keep them well pruned so that there's air, that there's, you have to make decisions about what's, and now that I know this, I could prune earlier so I wouldn't have to but I didn't know that in the beginning, and I let them get kind of bigger and overgrown. But to fix it, I had to go in and like cut off sections. I'm like, but there's a little flower there that might be a thing one day if I just leave it. But for the health of the plant, I had to get better at pruning. And it has just been kind of hysterical and also weirdly confronting about, it probably ties into some like minor hoarding behavior or something, that it's just really hard for me to cut a thing off or say like, nope, not that part. I don't know. Anyway.
But I will say that a lot of times we tell stories that you say, this story relates to this certain thing in business or this certain facet of leadership or this part of running a company. But your story relates to me anyway, everything about business, everything about running a company.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what it's so funny, because I saw this meme and it was for the, 90th time seeing the same meme. And I'm sure you've seen it. It's like a 2-panel meme, and you've got both figures in the panel are using a pickaxe to go through some dark material, and there's gold that they can't quite see. Mm-hmm. And one just gives up like an inch away.
Yes.
Right? So it's like, well, you never know, and hard work and keep going and all that stuff.
Right.
And I get the value that meme is trying to convey. But at the same time, I think a lot of the art of running a business is knowing when to go, you know what, that's not a fruitful use of our time.
Right.
And if you always follow that meme, you're never pruning, and you don't have direction. You're always thinking that nugget of gold.
One more shove and then it will be the goal. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. At this point you're bringing up, we just talk about memes the whole time. There's a meme, it says something about, oh gosh, I wish I could remember what it is, but it's something like, great things make you really nervous or whatever. Like, I forget exactly what the description is, but then it says, like big, bold choices are blah, 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 blah. And it says, so are stupid choices. I was like, and that's why life is hard. It feels a little bit like that sort of like dichotomy of, yeah, sometimes it's just like 4 more axe picks and you get to the gold, but the gold may not be there at all. And if it is, it may be another 42 miles down the road. And is that worth it? Like, both things are true. And that's why it's hard. Because on the other side of this is a pruning experience. And it's not like this traumatized me, and why I think this is much more deeply seated than this like first traumatic event. But at our very first house, our last house, shortly after we moved in, there was this huge, again, I'm not a plant person. I don't know what kind of like bush shrubbery thing it was, but it was kind of overgrown onto the around our screened-in front porch, and you couldn't see, and there were like bugs and spider webs and stuff. So I decided that I was going to prune it back, and I did. And within like 3 days, it died. Just died, the whole thing. And that was my first learning that like you can over prune or prune at the wrong time, or that there is an art to pruning, and some things are more delicate in how and when you prune them than other things that you can just chop an axe or whatever. But even when we have these giant yew trees in our yew bushes in our front yard that are like 60 or 70 years old, and my fear of pruning made them, they were growing into the road. It was kind of a mess. And so I looked it up, and this lady, some gardening lady, was like, you can't hurt them. Just go at it. They're really resilient. And I was like, perfect. Even then, even when I knew that it didn't matter how I did it, every single snip. Like I was like, I'm sorry, tree. Like, I'm sorry. And yet I know it was good for it. And yeah, so in all these awarenesses around pruning, I'm just constantly thinking, where else does that show up in my life and business?
But so one of the first things you said is that you've gotten okay with pruning something when it just started to go off in a different direction, when it's just a small growth. And this is kind of the harder part for me, not in pruning, but in the extension in business, because I'm more of a, well, let's see where this goes type person. Unless there's some imperative why I can't, well, let's dabble in securities law. I don't do that. But at the same time,
let's try neurosurgery.
I do like to see where things lead when actually, when you look back, you think, well, gee, I really wished I nipped this at the bud, when it was just a little bit farther along. But the other thing that you had said, with this gardening lady and the yew bushes is, go have at it because you can't hurt them. And I'm wondering, I was kind of thinking about my firm because, I've been, not only has the firm been around for 18 years now, but the key people at my firm have been there, or most of the key people, not all of them, have been there for a long time. Yeah. The lawyers have been there for a long time. And I'm wondering, at what point do they turn into yew bushes, which is, well, go ahead. You can't hurt them. Just go ahead and you can tell them to do this or change direction or do whatever.
No.
They're fine.
No.
And I think that's a dangerous thing to do, to think that, well, you can't hurt them. And so then you act with impunity.
Okay. So I think there's two, I want to touch on both those points. I absolutely am a fundamentally left to if I'm not, my autopilot is, let's see where this goes. That is absolutely how my mind works. And it's not, when I said I'm fine with that, I probably mean that before I get to the extrapolating it to business, I probably mean that exclusively with these plants based on what I know now and what I've seen happen. Like the one tomato plant we had was just so choked out. It couldn't even, there were tomatoes growing in there, but I don't know that they'll ever turn green. Or ever turn red, because there's just I've seen it make other problems. And it was hard to undo because of the way it was all bungled together. It had grown in weird places and it was hard to decide what to prune. It was a mess, and it was hard to untangle, and it was hard to fix that far down the road. And so it gave me more clarity and sense of, with the newer plants I have, I now have this bigger, or a sharper clarity, or maybe it's more confidence that I need to stay on top of this from the beginning and not let it get overgrown. So there's that. So I think to extrapolate it outside of business, it's better understanding, because nothing works as, plants are a little bit, there's more of a science to it. I think a lot of things in business, there's not a Facebook group that can help you identify exactly what's overgrown, where that line of overgrown is. So
our Facebook group can do that.
I'm sorry. There is a Facebook group where you can check in with people. It's called So Here's My Story podcast community. So, better noticing, watching, understanding what overgrowth or it's not quite the right word I want, overgrowth, or what's too much, where are the places where pruning would be appropriate, better understanding where some of those lines are. When is the gum losing its flavor? Or when are you getting exhausted from pickaxing that even if there's gold over there, is it when do you pull back if it's not literally I'm going to give it 3 more whacks, and if it's not there, I'm going to have to cut bait because it's lost, sunk cost, and that's really hard to walk away from. So there's that awareness that I think is important. But your second point, remind me again. Shoot, I didn't write it down. I made a box for it on my page, but I didn't write a word in the box.
Well, it was about the yew bushes, but first let me just go back to when you're the thing that's missing from that meme about the 3 whacks away from the gold nugget is that, obviously, because it's a meme, it's single purpose. It only prioritizes getting to the gold nugget. But what it doesn't factor in, obviously, is the health of the person with the pickaxe.
Right.
And so if your priority is maintaining their health, whether it's physical, emotional, mental, etc., or saving their energies for some other endeavor, then sometimes, even if you knew you were 3 whacks away from the gold nugget, it's still prudent to decide, you know what, those 3 whacks aren't worth it.
Yeah.
And so we can redirect. But so that was the one on the meme. But you were you had a point about the yew bushes, I think.
Yeah. So I don't think, because her point was, I oversimplified a tiny bit. Her point wasn't necessarily you can do whatever with them, act with impunity. I think what is, because I don't think there's, and if her point was that, I don't think that extrapolates to business very well. I don't think there's ever a point where you can just go full out bull in a china shop and whatever. I think, though, that what is important about that lesson was not equating pruning with damage. That pruning is not inherently dangerous, or that it's not. So for me, sometimes having an opportunity where you can overstretch a behavior to realize that kind of the more center autopilot version. This is a place where I really wish it was a video so you could see. I think sometimes when you like underdo a behavior, or sort of hesitant about a behavior, and you're really aiming for like a nice equilibrium in the middle, it's really hard to aim for equilibrium. I think sometimes you have to sort of overshoot a little bit just to realize that even a little past what you're worried about isn't so bad. And then you can kind of come back to the middle. So it's almost like that, like if you're going to punch a board, you have to punch through the board kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Because if you just aim for the board, you lose momentum. And different, it doesn't quite equate, but it's kind of that concept. And so for me, having an experience where I could just prune without worrying that I was doing it wrong, or that I was going to kill the whole 70-year-old yew bush, helped me get a little bit more comfortable with the overall concept of pruning in smaller places, because then it looks gorgeous. Like now it looks like this cool like bonsai tree, and it opens up the whole yard, and it's not literally growing out into the road where our poor mailman has to sort of like drive in around it to our mailbox and then back out again. Sometimes has to get out of his car because of the bushes in the way. So it's just, it helped me feel more comfortable with the process of pruning. And
well, I think, and to me, it's kind of reframing what that means, because pruning can be seen exclusively as cutting something away, just cutting back or stunting growth in a certain direction, when instead, really, my understanding, and I'm not a gardening person, my understanding is that it's really refocusing the energy and the resources of the organism to the places where it should go.
Yes.
And so that's much. To me, that's a better frame. Okay, I'd rather refocus and shape where we're going, as opposed to just saying, I'm cutting off this limb. So there's one way of doing it. And you mentioned bonsai, and it was funny because I was thinking that exact thing, especially having seen and gone to a workshop at bonsai when we visited Japan, and just watching the art of, you could say pruning, but it's really
sculpting almost. Yeah.
That tree. And so it's the artist or curator or whatever the proper name is, has a vision for how that tree is going to look, how it's going to fit in with and complement its environment, how it's going to bring the disparate pieces of the whole setting together. And then when you watch somebody clip here or clip over on the other side, you're not thinking of it as cutting back. You're thinking of it as really perfecting.
Yeah. I love the refocusing the energy. Like that is absolutely what's important about this. Like when I let I didn't know early on because there were just too many different kinds of plants to kind of be learning about. But with the cucumbers that we had, there are these mini cucumbers, but the vine's not mini. And I just let it grow and let it grow. Well, apparently you're supposed to kind of prune it down to just one main vine or maybe one in a split. But I had like 5 really long vines going, and all of them had tons of flowers on them and little sprouted cucumbers. And I'm like, well, I don't want to cut off any. Like all of these could be cucumbers. Like what? Well, 99% of them didn't turn into actual cucumbers because it was overloaded. Like the plant couldn't sustain that much growth. And had I cut it back earlier or cut it back from the beginning, it would have been easier to prune it because I wasn't cutting off the life force of a 6-foot vine with 32 little flowers on it that could be cucumbers. So it was easier for me because I didn't see all that possibility. And my hysterical emotional attachment that I have to, I'm like, I'm sorry that I'm giving up on you.
but you know, it really comes back to what your vision is for whatever you're doing and sticking with it. So if you decided, that, success to me would mean 2 really great cucumbers, then you can figure out how to focus your energy. And, early on, and we've talked about this, like even for starting my business, starting my law firm, you say, well, who's your ideal client? I'd be like, well, I don't know, somebody with a pulse ox and who's breathing, who might have a vague idea about a business, anybody who really wants to talk to me and pay me for my time is really my ideal client, because I wanted to pay my mortgage. I wanted to be able to grow. But really you only, in my experience anyway, only really started to hit our stride when we're like, no. It's not the myriad of possibilities. Mm-hmm. We're going to prune this back to really what our calling is. Mm-hmm. The people to whom we want to devote our real energies and our talents and our creativity. And it was that art of pruning when I was saying, you know what, we could take, like I got a call the other day from somebody who asked, are you able to handle this type of case? And they laid it out. And mentally, what I was thinking to myself was, yeah, we're absolutely able to handle it, but we're not going to.
Right.
Because that's not our highest and best use. And I referred her out. And when I spoke to the firm, we have our firm meeting, and I described the call. Even before I finished describing the fact situation, the lawyers on the call, you could see them going, nope. And they were shaking their heads. Nope, that's not who we are. Because we had pruned, and that was something we would have taken in 2005.
Right.
But we did not take it in 2020 because we had successfully pruned.
Yeah. The other place I think this shows up, because it's a little bit different than pruning, but I really saw it, and this, I can see the direct correlation to business, but the same thing happened inside of me when we bought this house, which we completely gut renovated. It was dilapidated, almost falling in. Everything about it, we had to be fixed. And so that was already a lot of work. But then there were things.
That's what appeals to an architect.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
This house is flawless. That's not for us. This one, dilapidated.
Yeah. This one needs some work. Yes, let's do it. So, right. And my husband's an architect. So there were a number of things that he wanted to change that I was like, wait, but there's already like a perfectly good thing there. Why would we do this? So he wanted to move the front door like 5 feet to the left. And I'm like, there's a perfectly good opening right there. Like, that's the dumbest thing. It would have been terrible to leave the front door where it was. It changes so many things. We don't need to go into that. There's this giant azalea bush in our front yard that really should have come out right in the very beginning. But, once a year, it's super gorgeous, but it's the rest of the year, it kind of looks awful. And now it's super overgrown because I haven't really pruned it. Now I'm finding it just like needs to come out. But once a thing is there, I have a hard time saying, oh, let's just take that out. Because I'm like, oh, but there's a lot of plants there, even if they're not the plants we'd choose. They're like, and I think in business, that comes up with so many things of any place where status quo is like, well, that's the service we've always offered, or and we have a couple clients for that, so we ought to keep doing it. Well, maybe not. Again, I love that concept of if you stop doing something, not ignoring the fears of stop doing the thing, but the refocus, because I hear it said a lot and like, you make space for the new thing. that does require this sort of like gaspy courage of like there not being any, like if I take out that azalea bush, it's going to look super barren out there for quite a while until the new thing grows in. And that feels like, I'd just rather leave the bush there where it is. But if you think of it as refocusing energy, that if we stop that, now we can channel all that into this other thing. That is much more appealing to me.
Yeah, and I think that's
easier.
The way it really is. I don't think that most businesses are satisfied with stopping something and staring at the vacuum.
Right.
I think what they do is, and what I've seen it, we're going to eliminate this division. You know what? We don't do this well, or it's not profitable. We only have 3 really hardcore clients over here. We've got 20 over in the other space. We're going to cut out the 3. We're really going to focus where the 20 are. Mm-hmm. And I do see a renewed energy in the places that make sense. And so I see pruning as a net gain rather than a net loss.
So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group,
which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts,
your stories.
Your stories.
You can find links to that group as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village.
Yes, it does.
We'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
In the best of ways.
Snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Christy Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything.
Including wrangling us.
Which
is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jody Hume.
And I'm Elliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.